Okay, I think
that is my absolute pleasure to pass this over to Jayne Morrish. She's our knowledge translation guru here at Brock, and I'm really excited for her to kick off this session. So Jayne, over to you.
Awesome, thanks. I'm just going to share my screen, make sure it all works. Yes, awesome. Okay, share. All right, are you all seeing slides? Yes. Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. And I also put in the chat Mentimeter link. We're going to use that throughout. In a couple of slides, I'll get to the first one and I'll share that screen so you can see all the feedback that we're getting from it. So before I begin, I want to make sure that I acknowledge the land, at least on which Brock University is located, is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people. So what are you getting into today? As Kyle said, it's not going to be full 2 hours. I'm also not going to probably completely stick to every minute breakdown here, but what we're generally going to do is this first intro presentation. It's going to be about 30 minutes. There's going to be those Mentimeter activities throughout. This is very much just like lay of the land. What the heck am I talking about? Then we'll do a 20-minute-ish presentation on knowledge mobilization strategies. That's like how you actually do this. That's when we'll then go into like a 15-minute group activity in breakout rooms. Built in a 5-minute break. I also will probably just do a pulse check after that activity. If people want to like, you know what, I want to go for the next 20 minutes, I'm good to go. Or if we feel like we need to break the break. And then we have a quick 10-minute presentation on just some kind of like key considerations for knowledge mobilization work. And then a final group activity. But I'm sure a lot of you are sitting there like, okay, who's Jayne? I know Kyle said she's a KT guru, but what does that mean? So I work at Brock as their knowledge mobilization officer. I work within the Office of Research Services. I'm seconded particularly to the Lifespan Development Research Institute, but in reality, I do this across the university. I have a master's in lifespan development from Brock. That's a research focused master's. And I also have a lot of applied experience in research evaluation and knowledge mobilization, knowledge translation. Previous to my work at Brock, I used to work at Smart Risk and Parachutes. That's injury prevention work. Very much used to be in the concussion wheelhouse. Worked with Dr. Charles Tatter a lot. That was kind of where I was. Have experience in evaluation. And in terms of my KT background, I have the Knowledge Translation Professional Certificate from Sick Kids and U of T School of Medicine, the Mobilize YU Certificate from York U, and I've done some training at St. Mike's as well for knowledge mobilization. And then someone said to me once, why do we only introduce ourselves with just our titles? We're more than just that. So I always throw some pictures up there of people that are important to me, which is my family, my partner Graham, and our lovely 2-year-old Lincoln, who we dressed as Maverick from Top Gun from Halloween. And he now knows far too many quotes from the movie and is terrorizing our cats and calling them Iceman. Not sure how we're going to stop that, but maybe we just embrace it. I don't know. We'll see. So I want to jump over to the Mentimeter activities, which I'm going to stop sharing these slides and then reshare the Mentimeter feedback so we can all see what's going on here. So if everyone can click that link and answer the first question, let's see, where are we all? Have you done knowledge mobilization or translation before? Are we no's? Are we yeses? Are we maybe question mark because you still maybe don't know what it is? Let's see. We're in a lot of no's. Some people maybe. Okay. The yeses are coming up. Oh, sure. Yeah, I see someone saying I signed in after the link. Yes. So if you signed in after, the link is back in the chat. Okay. We're kind of like, we're mid-range. A yes, a no, some maybes. Maybe the maybes will change once I've talked more about it. All right. This is just so we can see. We've got some people have definitely done it. Some people definitely have not thought they think they've done it. We've got some maybes. Okay, awesome. My next question to kind of get the lay of the land is I'm trying to go into like, I'm about to go into like, what is knowledge mobilization? But for those people who have done knowledge mobilization, how have you done it before? And this is you're actually going to type in responses. Like, what have you, for those of you that were the yeses, how have you done this before? What knowledge mobilization work have you done? This is where I wait for people to furiously type in responses, even if it's just like an example of a strategy that you've done, or like I've social media, things like that. Let's see what pops up. Okay. Oh, tons just popped up for me. Research summaries, infographics, social media, Instagram, partner reports. Okay, awesome. Synthesized reports, Twitter, reports, infographics, research posters, social media. Okay. So we have a lot of social media stuff, Twitter posts about pubs. That's awesome. A lot of infographics, co-creating podcasts, dissemination, parties, animated videos, training for practitioners, partnered research podcasts. Okay, so we definitely have some knowledge experience here on the call. This is awesome. And a lot of these will relate when we get to the next section, which will be knowledge mobilization strategies, academic publications. I'm so happy that someone mentioned academic knowledge mobilization because it is still knowledge mobilization. Podcasts, a lot of podcasts in here, which is awesome. Symposium. Okay. That's awesome. So tons and tons and tons of experience before. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is keep the Mentimeter up because there will be more questions throughout, but let's go back into and actually talk about what knowledge mobilization is. Okay, slides are back up. So what I'm going to do right now is review some of the terms that get mentioned a lot in this field. I am sorry that this is going to be a little bit of a boring definitional point, but I promise it will land on something that makes sense. No matter the term that you choose, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So one of the terms that gets mentioned a lot in this area is knowledge mobilization. As I mentioned, I am Brock's knowledge mobilization officer. And that refers to the movement of knowledge into active use. Really, this comes down to ensuring that the right information is available to the right people at the right time and in the right format so as to influence decision-making. The SSHRC definition of knowledge mobilization is that it refers to the reciprocal and complementary flow and uptake of research knowledge between researchers, knowledge brokers, and knowledge users, both within and beyond academia, in such a way that may benefit users and create positive impacts within Canada and or internationally, and ultimately has the potential to enhance the profile, reach, and impact of social sciences and humanities research. So with knowledge mobilization, you're really moving the knowledge that exists from research. So when you're all doing research, you're creating new knowledge and you're moving that knowledge into action with the people that can actually use it. And this ideally results in evidence-based decision-making and allowing for evidence-informed practice. More than just bridging a gap between like knowledge and practice, knowledge mobilization very much seeks to make connections between research and expertise and policy and practice and just generally people in order to improve outcomes in various organizations or sectors or groups. Knowledge mobilization, it's very much a proactive process. I saw a lot of notes around like partnered work, co-created work. It's this idea of working together. Now, this is the term I subscribe to. I like the word knowledge mobilization. So it's what I'll be using a lot throughout the presentation. But even as we saw, the title of this whole series is KT Field School. So of course there is knowledge translation, or commonly called KT. This can it's very much an umbrella term for the process of moving research and evidence into practice. This is what CIHR uses a lot. I've got the CIHR definition up on the screen. I'm not going to read it because it's, again, just like a general definition. At CIHR, they very much see the term KT as it's a very broad concept. It encompasses all steps between the creation of new knowledge and its application to yield beneficial outcomes for society. Although this CIHR definition mentions only the healthcare system, it can be applied to a variety of disciplines. Moving beyond the very technical definition on the screen, KT, it's really about taking created knowledge, like research, and working with various individuals to translate, exchange, and apply it in a form that allows for benefits to the people that information is relevant for. So it could be for the public, for policymakers, for practitioners, or even for other researchers. Now, before I go further into definitions, and with those kind of basic things in mind, I'll talk a lot about the public and policy and general understanding that this whole field, KT, KMBK, whatever you want to call it, it's about research impact, moving research to have impact. One piece that I would like to note is that not every single piece of research needs to have some kind of broad impact. That doesn't make sense. I love this quote from Lavis and colleagues. It says, "Not all research can or should have impact. Some bodies of research knowledge will not generate a take-home message because either the research has no apparent application for decision makers or the findings are not conclusive." That said, this excuse can be overused. I feel like sometimes researchers can worry about the fact that their research might not have a broad take-home message or isn't marketable. But that's okay. It would actually be really inequitable to try to make all research, all new knowledge, the focus of some kind of broad knowledge mobilization strategy. So it may not be relevant for those efforts at that point in time. So if you're sitting here and thinking like, Jayne, I can't like change public policy with my one paper. I can't make a whole social media campaign. I can't make a podcast. That is okay. Not all research should lend to those kind of broad pieces, but all research should be mobilized with other academics. That's why I was really happy that I saw some academic knowledge mobilization strategies come up on that Mentimeter, because mobilization to other academics, it's still knowledge mobilization. Every time you do a conference presentation, a publication, you are still mobilizing knowledge, and that is still a valued aspect of knowledge mobilization. Keeping on with the terms, we have knowledge creators, which is a term that refers to individuals who actually create new knowledge. So all of you, when you are doing research, you are knowledge creators. Add that to your new kind of tagline for yourself. You are a knowledge creator when you are making new research, new knowledge. We also have what's commonly called knowledge users, referring to the individuals who use created knowledge. CIHR defines knowledge users as an individual who is likely be able to use research results to make informed decisions about policies, programs, and or practices. This can include other researchers, key partners, community, media, practitioners, community organizations, service providers, the general public. A lot of the times, these people are referred to as your audience. So who does this research matter for? There are some other terms emerging, including the idea of next user. So who's the next user of the knowledge at hand? But basically, these terms describe the people that actually make new knowledge and the people that this knowledge can apply to. And these groups are not mutually exclusive. For example, when you are reading a journal article, you're a knowledge user at that point. So you can be both. So you can see there's a lot of different terms in this field. And depending on who you're talking to, you might be told that the key overarching title for the field is different. For example, some people, they really subscribe to the term knowledge translation. That is what CIHR uses. It's actually what I've been told that's in the CIHR mandate, meaning it would take an act of parliament for them to change what they call it. KT is the term most commonly used in the healthcare system. Some people really subscribe to the term knowledge mobilization, as they like the mobilization part of the term and how it implies that movement of knowledge into action to have impact. And as I mentioned, SSHRC uses this term within their granting processes, and therefore it's most common with social sciences and humanities research. There's also research utilization, which has been a term around since the 1970s to describe the incorporation of research evidence into practice. It's predominantly used in the nursing profession. In the business world, we see the term knowledge management. Several years ago, we saw the emergence of the term K-STAR, which is an attempt to amalgamate all the knowledge blank terms into one. And then another term that gets thrown in a lot is implementation science, which is, and I quote, is the scientific study of methods to promote the systematic uptake of research findings and other evidence-based practices into routine practice, and hence to improve the quality of effect and effectiveness of the health services and care. So basically it's KT to inform healthcare practices and service and care. So after I read through that list, you're probably like, those all sound the same. It's true. There is considerable overlap between the different terms, but the basic definitions can affect our understanding of the topic. For example, early definitions of the term KT implied that knowledge was like an object that could be given from one person to another, and that this was very much a unidirectional process, which is why some people really like the term knowledge mobilization, as that definition has kind of always mentioned a bidirectional relationship between knowledge creators and knowledge users. However, even at CIHR, they're placing a fair bit of focus on the synthesis and ethically sound application of knowledge aspect of their definition of knowledge translation. An important implication of this is that while groups like CIHR, they definitely encourage researchers to translate the results of their studies, they also understand that this needs to be done in a thoughtful and ethical and equitable manner, with the audience of said knowledge translation being considered and engaged within the process of translation as much as possible and where relevant. In fact, as the term knowledge translation evolves, it's now more commonly referred to as knowledge translation and exchange, KT and E. The key piece being the introduction of the word exchange, which implies a dialogue between researchers and the people that their research is relevant for, aka their audience. So basically, knowledge creators and knowledge users need to talk. All of that aside, no matter the term you choose, this whole field, it's all about the movement of research knowledge into applicable uses with relevant groups. As stated by Strauss and colleagues, the common element among all these different terms is a move beyond simple dissemination of knowledge into actual use of knowledge. KT, KMB, K, whatever you want to call it, it's not just about sharing or publishing or one-way information flow. It's about engagement, audience participation, people coming together, and attention to evidence, impact, and evidence. It's not just about throwing information out there and hoping for the best. It's about throwing information out there in a relevant way that relates to your knowledge users and making sure that your evidence is actually knowledge that people want. And evidence doesn't always just mean research. It includes evidence from your audience, what works for them and what they want to know. And again, this piece is really important. Knowledge mobilization, it is not just about pushing the information out the door. It's about engaging with people to create relevant information and to disseminate it in impactful ways. A big learning here is that yes, research has lots to give to people, to audiences, to the world. But people, your knowledge users, whoever they are, I often just call them people because it's different for every project. They have a lot that they can give to help inform research. They often bring the context of why research matters in the real world. And they also know how they want to know about it. They are your audience. So how they want to access information is very much their contextual knowledge. And basically, regardless of the term, the underlying intent in all cases is just to make research matter more for policy, for practice, and just for people, to make sure that people have a place within this entire process. One tiny caveat that I just want to note that I have at the bottom there is that whenever, let's say you're like, Jayne, I love knowledge mobilization. That's the term I love. But you are a CIHR researcher, make sure you use knowledge translation when you're applying for those grants. Like align your term with the funding, whatever you want to call it is what you want to call it, but make sure that you align your title with the grants that you're applying for. If they call it knowledge translation in the application, then talk about knowledge translation, but recognize they all kind of exist under the same umbrella. I told you I would get to one simple thing, and this is it, boiling it all down. The specific words used to describe this field are not important per se. What is important is how these words are operationalized. And that process is very simple. The goal of KT, KMB is to ensure that there is a collaborative, equitable, and respectful feedback loop between research and knowledge, and the people or groups that can use that information. And these people can be anyone. Could be educators, healthcare workers, policymakers, government officials, other researchers, or even just the general public. The big piece to note here is that knowledge mobilization exists to ensure that the movement of knowledge and research flows in this circular fashion, so as to inform people, be that through practice, collaboration, dissemination, policy, or just general awareness of research findings. And then further informing research as appropriate and relevant by learning from these people, what they might want to know, how they might want to know it, how they might be able to use this research, and what knowledge they might have to contribute to the entire process itself. So that's a lot about like what this is, but a question that comes up a lot is, okay, well, why is this important? Well, this field mainly exists because of something called the knowledge to action gap, where research is not always having the impact that it should. And this is due largely in part to two main issues. First is a failure on the part of knowledge creators to appropriately share knowledge. And second is a failure on the part of knowledge users to appropriately act on created knowledge. So basically, there's a problem in that feedback loop, right? Knowledge isn't always getting to people. People aren't always informing research. They're not always talking. This is definitely not a new issue. I'm going to show a video next that demonstrates this knowledge to action gap in action long before any of us were even born. I'm going to hope that it's not going to be too loud. So I'm going to have my hand on the volume here.
Do you have time for a quick story? I thought you might. A long time ago, an unknown illness impacting men at sea led to the failure of many expeditions. In 1497, a voyage led by Vasco da Gama experienced one of the earliest outbreaks. After 6 months at sea, most of his crew had fallen ill. In 1601, Captain James Lancaster set sail with a fleet of 4 ships. One ship was given lemon juice while the others weren't. The ship given lemon juice suffered fewer losses. Nearly 150 years later, British Navy physician James Lind developed an experiment to test possible cures. 12 men displaying typical symptoms of scurvy were divided into pairs. Within a few days, the pairs given oranges and lemons got better. In 1795, the British Navy took action, and the provision of lemon juice became routine. 70 years later, the shipping industry joined in, and citrus became mandatory. So, from the time citrus was suspected to be a remedy for scurvy to the time it became a part of policy for sailors, nearly 4 centuries had passed. The moral of the story? Failing to share and act on evidence can be a major problem. Today, there is more healthcare evidence than ever, but figuring out how to apply it poses a big challenge to those who work in healthcare.
So after watching that video, you can likely see there's probably always been an issue around the appropriate sharing and use of knowledge. And this gap still exists on some level in contemporary society. In fact, research has shown that it may take roughly 17 years for only 14% of research to find its way into practice. This phenomenon has been colloquially referred to as the 17-year odyssey of research. Now, please note there are numerous reasons behind the length of time between research and practice. Go beyond the scope of this presentation. The Green and colleague article is a great place to look. Also, really important to note is that these academic filters at the bottom of this graphic, they're really important, as most research cannot and should not directly translate into practice without a sound body of supporting research. I mean, you could imagine one single study that just has some like correlations doesn't mean you suddenly change practice because this one study found something. Research needs to be based off of like large bodies of research synthesis and replication. We all know that. However, knowledge does need help traveling through this pathway at a more effective speed. Shortening the time gap between research and practice will require an increased understanding of what it takes to implement new research and a broader understanding of how to effectively and equitably mobilize. Focusing just on the healthcare system, the reason I did that is, even as stated by Grimshaw and colleagues, is one of the most consistent findings from clinical and health services research is the failure to translate research into practice and policy. So it is a ripe area for examples. So for example, it's been found that 30 to 40% of patients may not be receiving care that adheres to scientific evidence, and that 20 to 25% of provided care may not be needed or may actually be harmful. Research has shown that there could be an estimated 30% improvement in cancer outcomes with optimum application of what is currently known. We could see at least a 10% reduction in cancer mortality through effective use of state-of-the-art therapies. It's been found that 26 to 95% of patients report being dissatisfied with the information that they receive from their family physicians. Another example that's very relevant for my experience in the world right now is that antibiotics are still overprescribed in children with upper respiratory tract symptoms, even though the science doesn't support that. However, there are problems with the premature adoption of treatment and research before they've been shown to be beneficial or accurate. Pushing research out too quickly and not in a careful way could be ineffective, harmful, and unethical beyond the healthcare system, any type of research. It's really important to, again, remember that no single study or research finding should lead to practice or policy changes. Remember those filters on the graphic from the last slide. Practice and policy change should require bodies of supporting research. So the issue here is a complex one. Research findings need to be translated in order to close this gap to help that circle flow. But this needs to be done carefully and thoughtfully and with science and safety at the forefront. You cannot overstate the science. And this is very much where the field of knowledge mobilization comes in, focusing on training and dedicating resources to kind of create that bridge between knowledge creators and knowledge users in order to get the most updated, relevant, and accurate information into action with the appropriate groups of people and in the appropriate way, when there's enough research to warrant it. Repeating something I said earlier, this field very much exists in order to ensure that the right information is available to the right people at the right time and in the right format so as to influence practice and decision-making. One other why that I like to mention, because I'm sure not all of you go to bed at night thinking of like the knowledge to action gap, but I'm sure at some point you think about funding. The integration of a knowledge mobilization component is becoming a common requirement for most funding applications, be that through the government or external funding agencies. This is even true at the graduate level. Reviewers are paying attention to student applications that have at least even like a small component of knowledge mobilization, even if it's just like a sentence or two, to note like, hey, I've conceptualized this and I want to make sure that my research has impact and I've thought about how to do this. Through the inclusion of knowledge mobilization, their funders are seeing that they can help to ensure that their funding dollars have applied benefits, longevity beyond set funding periods, and really just increased returns to society. It's actually a UN human right to have access to scientific discoveries. And to boil it down, funders have really seen that requiring individuals to focus on the applied aspect of their work will give them better value for their investments and give society better value for this investment in research. This concept was well put by Lavis in 2003 when he stated that lots of time and money are spent on the production of research knowledge. More value for money could be obtained by helping research organizations and knowledge brokers translate knowledge in ways consistent with our evolving understanding about how to best undertake knowledge transfer. So to compete in this fast-paced world of research, it's really important to ensure that your own work has a knowledge mobilization plan and support built in. This will make it much more attractive to potential funders. And I guarantee you, if at any point you are working on any grant application, KT, KMB, there will be a section on it. It is in every application I've ever seen. It's actually how Dr. Kyle Rich and I got in touch with each other. He was applying for a grant. There was a KT, KMB section, and he wanted some feedback from me. So the last part before we end this kind of opening piece is, okay, I've talked a lot about people. I'm like, oh, don't forget about your people. This should be based on your people. You got to make sure you're talking to your people. But like, let's talk about like, okay, who are your people and how, why is this important to actually engage with people when you're doing knowledge mobilization? So we are going to switch back to the Mentimeter. All of you, it should, Vivian, I know you put it in the chat. It still should be in there. I'm going to reshare that screen. But let's do a little thought exercise around, okay, for all of your research, who are your knowledge users? So think about the research that you're doing. Who are your people? Who can use your research? Sport organizations, healthcare professionals, sport, my peers, yeah. Lecturers, members, sport fans, parents, policymakers. Okay, this is awesome. Charities, decision makers, sport organizations. Okay, so we're seeing a lot of policy, a lot of sport-related organizational leaders, patients, people living with the condition, other academics. Yep. Okay, this is awesome. This is a really great list. And I'm telling you right now, this is one of the hardest things to do, to sit down and figure out who your knowledge users are. But once you know who they are, everything else becomes a lot easier, because that's when you start, once you know who you're talking to, you can think about how they actually want to access information. Okay, this is great. I'm going to just make sure we don't have, we're going to go back into the slides. If I can find them, there they are. Share. Awesome. Okay. So why is it important to think about people? Why did we even do that exercise? Well, it's fairly well accepted that researchers, clinicians, educational institutions, we should all do we know we need to do knowledge mobilization. We know, as I just mentioned, it's important for funding. It's important for tenure and promotion. It's an important tool. It's a way to get your knowledge out there. However, what is not always accepted and understood is how and why people should be engaged in this process. And a reminder, people just equal your knowledge users. I just prefer to say people because it's a nice broad piece. I find the term user a little bit problematic because people, like knowledge users, are sometimes seen as the other when they're doing research. Even the term user, right, implies that they are using something from the research. It can be thought that people outside of the research team, maybe they lack something such as research skills or critical thinking. They lack research or information, that they need help, like they need something from you. And that knowledge users are needed. Like, I got to put this in this grant. I've got to recognize my knowledge users. I oftentimes hear from community organizations like, oh yeah, I was part of that grant, but I never heard from the team again. And unfortunately, some of the time research may not consider the lens of relevant people. And on this note, I just really want to underscore how important it is that research should be driven by researchers. You are the experts in your area. You best know how to accurately and effectively conduct research. However, as we move into a larger focus on knowledge mobilization, you should be working to involve your knowledge users, your people, in this process where appropriate and relevant. That might be something as high as like participatory action research, where you're actually collaborating with knowledge users and your people. Or it might be just some simple knowledge exchange and engagement, but you have to do it on some level. One thing that I have learned is that people should be seen as collaborative and necessary partners. You should recognize that your knowledge users offer something such as unique expertise. They provide relevant knowledge. They have evidence. And no matter what, they offer the context of which you're trying to mobilize knowledge into. People should be your partners on projects. They should be informing your work where relevant. This idea of like nothing about us without us, right? And most importantly, when you're working with your people, it doesn't have to be formalized. It can or should be whatever type of engagement works best for you and your people. It could be that you are working, as I mentioned, like that formalized agreement and participatory action research, or it just could be a focus group talking with your knowledge users to understand what they're doing, what they want and how to mobilize with them. Why is this important? Well, researchers, you might think the way that you're presenting your information, your knowledge mobilization strategy looks great to you. What about what your knowledge users are seeing? Basically, you can mobilize, you can translate in the prettiest forms. You can have the best infographic ever. You can have all the experts at the table. But if you haven't remembered your knowledge users, your people, then your knowledge mobilization won't likely go very far. If research is to be used, it must answer important questions of concern to knowledge users, and it must be integrated with contextual evidence in order to become actionable in specific settings. This can only be accomplished if there's genuine participation from your people from the beginning of this research process. So you need to ask yourself questions like, what information do my people want? How do they access information? How do they want that information to look? What kind of is their language level? You really have to think about all of this, because again, what you might be seeing and what you're putting out there might not be what they're seeing. You might be looking up at a mobile just full of butts versus you looking at these cute little animals. Your knowledge mobilization, the strategies, they need to be selected based off of what the research shows, and in addition to the ways that your people can access information. So if you have information that's relevant to the general public, but you're like, I'm just going to do a bunch of journal articles, not very equitable, because the general public typically can't access information via that medium. It was within the 2003 work of Lavis and colleagues that this knowledge exchange model became really evidently important around selecting and implementing knowledge mobilization strategies. This knowledge exchange model posits that knowledge mobilization requires mutually beneficial relationships to be built, developed, and maintained across a project, with Lavis and colleagues explaining that over long periods of time, two-way exchange processes that give equal importance to what researchers can learn from decision makers and what decision makers can learn from researchers can produce cultural shifts. And overall, there is just very much broadly throughout this field a movement towards what's called knowledge exchange. This is the wonderful quote that explains this. This evolution from transfer to engagement in KT theory and practice is occurring alongside and in response to other challenges to traditional research approaches, and reflects increasing societal expectations that knowledge must not only be scientifically valid, but also socially robust. So in your knowledge mobilization journeys, I challenge you to lean into this evolution and make sure that your own knowledge mobilization plans respect and align with research, but also respect and align with your people. Work toward people engagement, however that works for you, your research, and your knowledge users. That might be a formalized agreement and partnership. It also might be something else. And again, this is not about your audience guiding or controlling your research. It's about having them at the table in the way that makes sense to provide research, to provide feedback, lens, and their context. So that ends our initial thing. What I'm going to do is stop sharing, see if there's any questions in the chat before I move on to section 2, when we're actually going to talk about how to do this. And you can close the keep the Mentimeter up, because we are going back to it eventually. Okay. Nothing yet. That's usually, this is how it goes at the beginning. Also, it's such great knowledge mobilization. It's so clear, right? You're all sitting there being like, of course, my people. Okay. Awesome. I will screen share for the next one. We're actually going to get into the strategies. Share. Okay. Awesome. So how do you do all of this? Oh, wait, I see something in the chat. Clear and fantastic. Thank you. Thanks. That's awesome. All right. So how do you actually do all this? I'm telling you, like, oh, mobilize, don't make an infographic though, if your people don't like it. Like, what do we do here? And just when I go through this, I know I just said it, but I just like, if this is the one thing you take away, plan your knowledge mobilization around your knowledge users, right? So when I'm going through this, like, don't be like, oh, infographics are pretty. Also take time to think like, do my people want infographics? Okay, so knowledge mobilization strategies, the way in which you actually do this. This is not an exhaustive list. Comes from some different knowledge mobilization, knowledge translation planning templates. Typically, the way that you actually push your knowledge out there, you can divide them into 3 different types of categories. You can make products, so you can do this like a thing. You can have an event, so we're getting together and you're networking, or you can create a network, so like a discussion board, social media type thing. What I'm going to do next is show some examples of some relevant knowledge mobilization strategies. Again, not exhaustive. These are just some of the most common ones. What I've embedded throughout is a lot of resources to help you if you at any point are getting into this where you're doing some knowledge mobilization work. Starting with the most popular, infographics. Everyone loves them. Everyone knows them. Short for information graphics. They're just like visual graphical depictions of information. They generally exist on the age-old concept that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and humans have used in visuals to display information and tell stories from early cave paintings. Research has shown that infographics are really good at conveying knowledge. There's no like broader scoping review of their impact. McSween Cadeau and colleagues in 2021, that's currently being undertaken, like a sweeping review. It's just not out there yet. However, there is some work from the concussion world. Providence and colleagues have found that around concussion education, infographics can be really effective. But they also indicated that they need to be developed collaboratively. When you make an infographic, you just have to make sure that you have information that's relevant for it, right? As you can see on the one on the screen, you don't have to be able to make a pie chart. It's not necessary that you have a graph in there, right? It just, can you make this visual? Can you tell a story with some images? Does that relate? There's some research that just does not relate to imagery being aligned to it. So you really have to make sure that you have that, and you can distill your knowledge into a very simple way that can tell this flow of the story. Here are two other infographics, not super related to any of these areas, but I like them because they just show, again, they can be about anything. These are, again, not ones I've made. I've got all the citations up. The one on the left of your screen, the healing power of cat purrs. No bar chart on that page. There's no pie chart, but it just shows and relates to the human body, how like the decibel level that a cat purrs at actually relates to healing. It's cool. The one on the right, I love this infographic. It's the 10 places to see in the world before they're gone. Wonderful use of different visuals, gets the like different differentials across, like look at like the number of people, those hourglass around how much time is left with these places. Small issue with this infographic is you download it, it's just like this giant scroll of a document. So it's not entirely useful if you're not looking at it on a screen or for printing out. It probably would have been better as like a booklet. Seeing some stuff in the chat. Stats Canada has great infographics. Very, very true. There are so many infographics out there. I don't think you can go through a day without finding an infographic. Again, these are just ones like I have found. There's also dailyinfographic.com, which I have cited. A great place to see some good infographics. Also, I didn't cite them, but I should have. Informationisbeautiful.net. Wonderful place to learn about data visualization. They've got this great one about movies and if they're based on true stories. And they actually like went through films that were based on a true story and scene by scene. Just awesome data visualization. Here's some infographic resources. So we've got all the pieces I mentioned and that McSween, Cadeau, and colleagues piece and the work around concussions from Providence and colleagues. Next one I want to talk about is research summaries, plain language summaries. I saw a lot of people mention this when I said, how have you done this? Again, they're just like synopses of research findings written in plain language. They have been found to potentially have like be like an effective tool at mobilizing knowledge. However, research is limited again, like there's not tons of evaluation on this, which is why in the next presentation, I'm going to talk about evaluation. But it's just, again, you summarize your research into this really simple, usually they're like back and front or a news article. Just what's the facts? What did we find? Simple language, no jargon, and it's all in there. This one is definitely probably not related to any of you, but I just love it because it's one I just worked on. It's from a MAFRA funded project around farming, and it's 11 facts about farming, which I did not realize how complicated agriculture is. And we worked to like distill it into these like just 11 facts, and it's one page back and front. So I guess 2 pages. And it just simplifies all the different pieces, all the facts you would know to just get like a base understanding of like agriculture in Canada. And then there's the SIRC. So they've got their wonderful blog. And what I did actually is I screenshot one that Kyle sent me to show this really simple, plain language summary around resilience through adaptation, how sport organizations responded during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is just a simple research summary of different findings. It's not all one project. It's a bunch of different pieces. And it's just on there for people. They want that one snapshot that they can get there. They can go there and they get what they need to know. And they don't have to know the jargon that's common in the area. Just policy papers. as noted by Scott and colleagues, a policy paper is a research piece focusing on a specific policy issue that provides clear recommendations for policymakers. Important to note when I say policymakers here, again, it's just like decision makers. We're not thinking just like government. Could be people at sport organizations, people at organizations in general who have to set policy. General purpose is that they're just to like share research and knowledge on a policy issue, on a relevant policy issue, in order to inform people's decisions. They're typically written in plain language. They're short documents. They might be accompanied by plain language summaries of related research material. Wonderful, wonderful resource that also was shared with me for this was, again, the SIRC. They have an entire section on Canadian sport policies. So I actually went and I scrolled through all this and I found like the concussion in sport. The reason I obviously went to that one is that's a wheelhouse I used to be in. I actually helped to write that Parachute Canada guideline on concussion in sport. So I was happy to see that there. And it's just like everything you would need to know if you were writing a policy around concussion, all of the resources. And they actually, so you click on them and then they've got, okay, here are the concussion in sport resources. You can go here and find concussion research. You can find communication tools, protocols, and policies. And then what I loved in here, if you saw midway down on the protocol and policies, build your own concussion protocol, build your own concussion policy. And they actually provide a full resource to build your own concussion policy. So again, it's just this one place to go. If I'm a policymaker on any level around sport policy, I can go to this website, find out what I need to know on these critical topics, and then actually use that to inform what I'm doing. Here are some resources on policy papers, obviously everything on the SIRC that I mentioned as well. What I'm going to do next is show a bunch of videos. So videos lie in what's called digital knowledge mobilization. So using digital means to mobilize knowledge. What I'm going to show first are two examples of whiteboard videos. I'm sure you've seen them. I'm sure you all love them, but it's important to also make sure we're all on the same page.
Hi, I'm Mike Evans, and I'm a doctor, and I've got 3 kids, Willa, Finn, and Angus. And they're like a lot of kids. They like to play sports. They're a bit accident prone. So why am I telling you this? Well, I wanted to talk to you about a thing that tends to happen to kids that do play sports or even just have the occasional accident. Probably heard about it before because of a guy named.
I'm not going to show the whole thing. I'm going to show one more video here, whiteboard video, just to show like the difference. Like there are so like you might have seen that one, but like Jane, I can't make that. Like I can't draw. I don't know anyone that draws. There's also ways that you can make them externally.
You probably already know a child who's physically active has better heart, muscle, and bone health. But did you also know that physical activity boosts brain health in kids too? That's right. The 2018.
Okay, so whiteboard videos are awesome. They're just simple ways to like catch people's attention, summarize research findings. And again, I know you're looking at being like, I cannot do that. That second one, it's actually made through something called VideoScribe, which is an online system, like software that you can use to create whiteboard videos. They have like images already imported in that have been drawn. You can add images in. It's not as great because it just kind of puts a hand over them and they appear. It can draw out all your words. It can move things along. So you can actually get this type of software to make your own videos, and it's not that complicated. These are wonderful for sharing on websites. They're amazing on Twitter. Like you just having a tweet with that, someone can watch a 2-minute video. Now on Instagram, you could have it as a reel. It's a great form of digital knowledge mobilization. What I'm showing next is another video. This one's from the University of Waterloo Faculty of Health. It's social responsibility in community sport, not whiteboard, a little bit probably more, this is more professionally produced, but it's just, again, a way to show that you can just use video to mobilize your knowledge.
Millions of children and adults around the world participate in sport and recreation activities. To make this happen, nonprofit community sport clubs coordinate teams, leagues, and other sports services.
And that was just another simple one. And now I'm going to show this last one. I'm not going to show the whole thing. I had to screen grab this one from LinkedIn to make it work. But it's about what makes sports spectating family friendly, a phenomenological study of mother sport game day experiences. As a mom, like as a knowledge user, so I would be one of their knowledge users here. I was like, yes, I've felt this before. Absolute wonderful video. And Kyle was telling me ahead of time, they just sent this to a group. Maybe Kyle, you could put in the chat the group that they sent it to. I can't recall off the top of my head. They actually made this video for them. Okay, again, I know I said I wasn't going to show the whole one. Seeing a bunch of stuff in the chat, so I just want to make sure I'm not missing any questions. Awesome, thanks, Kyle. So what I'm going to show you next is, it's not totally related to the any of your areas of interest, but it comes from this wonderful group called the Fun Theory. And it was just this, they have this concept that, if you have research that's that's engaging and relevant and tells the world, this is what you need to do, this is the healthy and safe choice for the world. They said, okay, you know what? Just make it fun. People like fun. If something is engaging, they will want to do that, right? Make it the easy choice for people. They call it the Fun Theory. And they gave out grants around people that had research knowledge, this is what the world needs to do. They're like, okay, can you make it fun? All right, here's some money to make it fun. So I'm going to show the whole video. And it's just this, again, just keep in this mind that knowledge mobilization can be fun. If you have research that's telling someone something interesting, lean into that. Awesome. Great initiative. They've got tons of videos on YouTube, putting Super Mario sound effects on hand sanitizers, turning recycling bins, you put it in, it would make it sound like it was falling into a cavern and then smashing at the bottom. Really just wonderful creative ideas around getting research knowledge out there. Another form of digital knowledge mobilization, social media. There's tons of different social media platforms and the ways that these social media platforms can be used. I saw a lot of you mention oh, I've done Twitter, I've done social media. As noted by Phipps, social media can theoretically support a co-creation knowledge mobilization method where researchers and their decision maker partners go beyond just exchanging knowledge to co-create knowledge. Social media really allows for that networking piece. Riebling has outlined numerous recommendations for the effective use of social media in knowledge mobilization. Shauna is a wonderful guru in this area, including integrating social media throughout research process, questions to consider, do I even need an online presence? What I've done here is linked a presentation from Shauna about the use of social media in knowledge mobilization, but just want to go through a couple kind of critical needs to consider. If you're doing knowledge mobilization through social media, please consider your team, your primary goals, your audience. Again, audience is so important. I have a lot of people that work with youth and they're like, I'm going to go on Facebook. And I'm like, youth are not on Facebook anymore. So you've got to you better learn a TikTok dance. I'm sorry. That's the way you can mobilize youth right now through social media. So it's that considering it, the current conversation around the topic, as I just mentioned, selecting the right tools. You don't want to go on the wrong platform for the wrong knowledge user. Content, what do you have? Can you share that on social media? How will you measure success and do evaluation? You've got to check your analytics and see what kind of posts are working, what aren't working. And then also your name and your design. Really important pieces to remember here is that social media is not for everything. Social media is not for everyone. It's also really important to sit down and think, do any of my partners or my collaborators, do they already have a social media presence that I could collaborate through? Perhaps your work is a social media campaign within an already existing network rather than your own social media page. I often engage with a lot of people that are like, I'm going to make a Twitter for this project. I'm going to make a whole Twitter page. Like, that's great. Do you have enough content though to maintain a whole Twitter page? Or should you just maybe find some partners that have relevant audiences and give them some tweets to put out based off of your work, make little tiles or infographics to put out through them? So it's just considering that, like, do you have enough content to maintain that? Wonderful example of some kind of sport related knowledge mobilization online is the project, I want to say it's called Project Echo. And they use a lot of graphics and visuals to communicate research. It's the after effects of para sports events, capturing the voices of people with disabilities. And they just put out a bunch of these tiles and on different topics, and you can scroll through with different findings. Again, it's not like, they're not like little infographics. It's just little like visual depictions of relevant findings. I saw a lot of you mention podcasts, which is what I'm going to talk about next. Very, very popular. Still, I would say digital knowledge mobilization. They don't have to be a lot of work. You do need the correct equipment. You need a script. Even if you're a guest on a podcast, make sure you got your script ready. I also would like to remind people, like, an individual research project should likely never be its own full separate podcast. Maybe it's an episode in a relevant podcast. Maybe it's a season, but not a podcast on its own, unless you think you're going to have enough content to keep a podcast going indefinitely. This is very similar to the social media piece. Do you have enough to make your own podcast? If not, look for podcasts on your topics or ones that are about disseminating research in simple terms and connect into those. I'm sure you could write to those people like, hey, you've got this podcast that's related to my topic. A great example is Parachute, National Injury Prevention Organization, just launched their own podcast called Popping the Bubble Wrap. They talk about various different topics around injury prevention in children and youth. Why wouldn't you connect in with that community organization and say, hey, you've got a podcast. My research might be a great episode. Like, you can interview me. I could provide some feedback and we could talk about this injury prevention related sport issue. There's tons of different areas out there that you can connect into. However, this is something that's interesting to you, what I've linked at the bottom here is a guide to academic podcasting. It is an amazing resource if you're interested in learning more about podcasts. Someone said, why do you think you need a script? Just curious. Personally, I was able to do it without, though I had notes on things to hit. Let's say script should be notes. I have a lot of people that think, I'm just going to go in. You don't need a script being like, hello, my name is Christine, and I'm going to talk with you about this, but you need to have like your key messages. If you are a host of a podcast, I would very much like have your script ready. Any of the people that I've talked to that like host their own podcast, so like that intro session, it's pretty scripted. Like, obviously we can go off with jokes and things like that, but it's pretty much, we know what points we want to hit. We know what questions we want. When we get into plain language next, I'm going to talk about two important things, which is called your SMIT and your BLAM. Your SMIT is your single most important thing, and your BLAM is your bottom line actual message. At the very least, have your SMIT and your BLAM ready. And even just some notes around, like, if they ask me about methods, what are some plain language ways to say what I said? So you don't sit there being like, and then I did a logistical regression analysis and like start spiraling into jargon. Have it all ready. Yes. Mention that it can reduce your verbal tics, right? It also will help you not go back into like the jargon way that you're typically used to talking. Some resources around creating all of this. We've got, there's tons of different places online to create visuals: PictoChart, Canva, Infographia, Venngage, lots of different ones. Choose the ones you like the most. I really love Canva right now. There's software that you can use to create things. Photoshop. I use Pages on my Mac. Dailyinfographic.com. Also Stats Canada, as someone mentioned, is great infographics. I want to know what the daily infographic piece, like, anyone could submit. So like, they haven't been vetted, but you can check their trending infographic section. For images, please remember, like, images, you can't just Google an image and save it and use it, right? You have to remember that you're checking the trademark, the copyright, or the required attribution. Two great websites to get some more like openly available images are the Noun Project or unsplash.com. VideoScribe is that resource that I mentioned on making your own whiteboard videos. And then also consider your own communication staff at your host institution. I will share my PowerPoint slides. I promise you will get all of them. You don't have to screenshot these resources and hope for the best to find them later. Everyone will get the slides. I'm also happy to talk with any of you later as well. I'd be remiss to not talk about a couple academic strategies. As I mentioned, mobilizing to other academics is also knowledge mobilization. So things like publications, consider open access, conferences, training with other researchers, and graphical abstracts. I'm not going to spoil it and go too deep into graphical abstracts, as we're going to have a whole session on them. But basically, it's a small pictorial representation that's journals are often requiring people to submit with the journal article now. They're wonderful. They can lend with impact. They're really great for sharing on social media. I do have a couple like resources here on graphical abstracts, but highly just recommend that everyone just attend that session on graphical abstracts. And now it is your turn. So I'm going to stop sharing this and then share over to my, actually, I'll just stop share because I got to pull it up. We're going to go over to Jamboard. And so I'm going to put that link in the chat after I grab it. And we are going to put you all into groups. Let's make sure this shared. Jamboard. Yes. Okay. Now let me share my screen. So what's going to happen here is we're going to put you into 4 groups. Whatever group you were in, it'll you'll know your room 1, room 2, room 3, room 4. And everyone will go into this Jamboard. Room 1, you've got your own Jamboard. Room 2, you've got yours. Room 3, room 4. And in each one, what I've done is these are actually from the SIRC, and I picked a topic around sport policy. So concussion in sport, and just a little blurb. It's not a research blurb, just so you kind of know what we're talking about. Gender equity in sport, reconciliation in sport, and inclusion for persons with a disability in sport. And what you're going to do now in your groups is come up, okay, if we are doing work on concussions, again, any type of research, who would be some knowledge users that would care about concussion research? And then you're going to use the Google Jamboard tools to just add some Post-it notes. You will all have options in there to do that. They pop up on the side here. And then once you've come up with a list of just a couple knowledge users, sit and think, okay, so if I think that parents are a knowledge user for this, parents are caregivers, what's a knowledge mobilization strategy that I could reach them with? And then just add another Post-it note there. So all you've got to do. Don't go too big. Everyone just make sure you scroll to your right section. So again, if you are in room 2, make sure you scroll over to room 2. Nominate someone to talk, because we're going to do this for 10 minutes and then come back and do a quick round table around one sample, one example, and what your knowledge mobilization strategy was. It's pretty simple, I promise. You should all be able to access it. Just checking in the chat. Everyone is back. Awesome. Okay. So let's do super quick roundtable. Room 1, you don't go through everything. And what I will actually do is I will share so everyone can see what you did. Keep the Jamboard open because we are going to be going back into our groups. Share. Oh, you went ahead and did evaluation strategies. Room 1, you're going to have just a little bit. Does anyone from room 1 want to share pick one knowledge user and one knowledge mobilization strategy? One thought. Go ahead. You just unceremoniously unmute yourself if you'd like.
I'll go. So we talked about medical personnel and how we might assume that they know a lot about concussions, but the reality is that maybe they don't, or that's not their area of expertise. So Heather had brought up the idea that making sure that the language in there is actually more in medical terms, and having the references so people could follow up with it, but still be short. So considering maybe a fact page or the 1 to 2 page summary. I'm sure that's not on our strategy list, but that was one of the things that we discussed.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Especially considering how busy they are, right? Medical personnel often don't have time to do training, right? They're busy. So trying to get that information to them. That's awesome. Room 2, gender equity. Anyone from room 2 want to volunteer to chat? Just again, one thought that you had in a knowledge mobilization strategy that related.
I can talk. We were talking about women and girls participation in sport. So I'll talk about this because we had a good conversation about the knowledge users being women and girls and how we could have kind of that bottom up approach of doing community events with women and girls where you implement that research you might have into some kind of community-led initiative where people can come and learn, and it's impacting the people who is your target group for this audience. So that's where we have down at the bottom, athlete engagement under the KMB strategies. So community programming, community events with women and girls, and consultation.
Awesome. I love it. You've got knowledge exchange in there. That's amazing. Good job. Room 3. So you had reconciliation. Again, we know I realized after I didn't think about my knowledge users. I didn't think about the fact that not everyone might be from Canada. So I was around like rebuilding Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples. Anyone from room 3 want to talk to us like one example and one knowledge mobilization strategy?
Yeah, I can go ahead. So we had a little help with the Aboriginal Sports Circle, but we just also thought about like the athletes, local and regional, national organizations, as well as funding bodies. And for strategies, we're really just trying to pick apart some like specific ones. So workshops, making sure we disseminate statistical information, social media, infographics, a lot of things we talked about. And then someone also brought up like community-focused events to actually engage people from the direct community, which we thought would be nice, as well as some like panel discussions with experts and things of that nature. And we just got to the strategies and then we got called back in. So
yeah, and I mentioned it. I probably mentioned it too quick. You're gonna have a whole like 5-minute session to like think about evaluation strategy. So all of you are ahead of the game for that, which is awesome. Because I'm going to talk about evaluation in a second to help you. Room 4. Oh wow, room 4. You went in it to win it. Okay, does anyone from room 4 want to talk about one thing that you ignore the orange right now? We're going to talk about evaluation strategies after.
Yeah, we went a little crazy, but
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, let's go with, we talked about parents with children who have disabilities, and potentially working with organizations that center around disability sport, and working with those organizations to provide either newsletters for parents, or someone mentioned graphic novels because they have this like heroic kind of like exciting visual aspect to it.
Love it. I love it. There's I didn't talk about it because we didn't have enough time, but there's a whole movement in knowledge mobilization around info comics. Like, and how like they're just like this impactful way that like break down literacy barriers, can communicate with like humor, and can get like, so love it. You guys went even further. This is awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing that one, go back into my lovely slides, which I will find. We're going to get into just like 2 key considerations. I know I said like maybe we'd have a 5-minute break, but what I'm going to do instead is just make sure we end early, because that means you can all then go forth and do many other things once we end, because this will be nice and quick. First key consideration is plain language. A key aspect of all this work, I know I'm saying like, oh, like write an infographic, write a plain language summary. Big thing is to be able to make sure you're communicating in plain language. As outlined by Wickland and Ramos, plain language is communication that an audience can understand the first time that they read or hear it. It is clear and concise, uses short sentences and simple words. It keeps to the facts and is easy to read and understand. Plain language communication is simple and direct, but not simplistic or patronizing. In general, just it like avoids the use of unnecessary jargon. It uses a language level appropriate for a given audience. It works to stick with the audience. So basically it lends to audiences remembering what was being said. It's really key for media engagement. So if any of you are ever doing media interviews, which is a common knowledge mobilization strategy, you've got to be able to make sure you communicate plainly. For those podcasts that we chatted about a lot, you've got to make sure you're talking in plain language. And again, I'm just going to say it one more time. It is not about being patronizing or simplistic. It is about making information more universally understood. Why do you want to do this? Well, I mean, it is just like the cornerstone to all knowledge mobilization work. If you want to move the research that you're associated with into practice or into just use beyond academia, it's important to be able to convey your findings to outside audiences through plain language communication. It helps to increase the accessibility of your own work. The general public, like they're not typically trained to communicate in scientific terminology often used in academia. So you've got to make sure that you align with that. It even helps to increase accessibility of your work with other researchers. In fact, a recent story from CBC, that's Canadian Broadcast Corporation, for those not in Canada, as it happens, it was an article that said, even fellow experts in a given research field are less likely to cite research if the study is full of jargon. It's called Say What? More jargon in a paper means fewer scientists will read it, studies find. Just another clear showing of the importance of plain language communication. I've got the link to the story here as well. In general, it allows for the sharing of research and having an impact beyond just a scholarly community. If plain language communication was not a practice, and the majority of the world would not know about major research findings, because the majority of the world doesn't have that training. And finally, as put by Garwood, plain language communication helps to reduce meaning in a variety of contexts and across sectors. How do you start? Common refrain in everything that I'm saying. Think about your people. What's their language and reading level? What do they care about? What do they need? do not waver from this understanding throughout the process. Remember, like you've got to kind of like in your mind, I am talking to that knowledge user group. How do they talk? What examples do they want? What do they know? What things can I bring in that are related to like their actual contextual experience? Some strategies for doing this work: use plain language dictionaries, many of which are available online. I've got a whole resource page on these slides. Remember that introductions are your friend. Use a structure that makes sense. Use relevant examples and or anecdotes. A lot of you talked about like parents and caregivers. If you're doing communication to parents and caregivers, then make sure your examples are of parents and caregivers. Use short sentences and paragraphs. Use the active voice. That's very different for a lot of us in academia. We're used to writing in a passive voice. Plain language communication is active. And you've got to cut out all jargon. A great way to bolster the impact of your own plain language communication is to follow what are called the stickiness success principles. They come from a wonderful book entitled Made to Stick: Why Some Ideas Survive and Others Die. The idea here is that you need to use language that's understandable, but you also need to make sure that you're presenting ideas in a manner that stick with the reader. And according to this book, the authors Chip and Dan Heath, there are kind of 6 ways you can accomplish this. And these are called their stickiness success principles. Typically, I would go through each of them. What I'm going to do, though, in this PowerPoints that you get, just we don't have a lot of time, is I will actually expand all the slides to go through all of them. But just it's basically that's around being simplistic, being unexpected, being concrete, being credible, getting at the emotional side of things, and doing that through the use of stories. What I did include in my slides is those 2 critical, I would say, pieces from this is simple messaging. We talked a little bit about scripting for podcasts, and I said, have your SMIT ready. And it's your SMIT is your single most important thing. It's recognizing the concept. If you say 3 things to someone, you really don't say anything because they're not going to retain it. So always have that single, simple message. What is the single most important thing that you want to say about this? And also having your BLAM ready. Your BLAM stands for your bottom line actual message. It's really easy to talk about research findings in plain language, but you need to make sure you are telling people what they need to do with that research information. What is that bottom line that they need to know? It can't just be like, oh, hey, sport is important for kids. It could be make sure that your child is involved in sports as it relates to them, or here are some resources for your child that might help them participate in a way that's accessible for their own experience. Like give them those really key critical messages of what they need to do with this information. And if it's just like, hey, be aware, that's fine. Just be clear with that. There's also some simple writer tools online. There is this one that I've cited here. It's a little bit more of a fun tool, a little bit less professional, but you plug in text, and what it's going to do is highlight for you if you've used words that are not among the 10,000 most common words in the English language. Again, it's not like this amazing tool that like summarizes everything for you, but it just hits on like, oh, that is probably too complex and I hadn't thought about it. Another wonderful one is the Hemingway editor. It's a little bit more professional. You plug in text, it's going to give you a readability level. It's going to show you how many adverbs you've used, how often you're using the passive voice, which you shouldn't be, phrases that have simple alternatives. It'll highlight pieces that are hard to read, ones that are very hard to read, and really just helps you to start like thinking your way through maybe where you're not maybe hitting the mark on being plain. A few other plain language resources. Again, these are going to be in the slides that you get, but it's just some of those like online dictionaries that you can use. There's the Hemingway app. There's the Language Portal of Canada. We've got the Simply Put guide from the CDC, bunch of different resources to help you. Just some general recommendations. I can't say it enough in all this. It's just always think of your audience. Plain language communication, it's not set on one single kind of set of strategies. Static set of strategies. It's based on how your audience communicates. It's successful only to the degree to which your audience actually understands what you're saying. Always remember your goal. Don't say too much. Don't overcomplicate it. Remember, if someone picks up your infographic, you're not going to like appear in a poof of smoke to explain it to them. It's got to stand alone. And remember that like text is okay. Just make sure it's short and understandable. And then the other really key consideration, it should have its own, it does have its own workshop. You can become a credentialed evaluator because of how critical this is evaluation. So how do you know that your knowledge mobilization work's going okay? Are your knowledge mobilization strategies having intended impact or any impact at all? How are your partners and your people actually feeling about this? Like you put that infographic out in the world, but like, is anyone using it? How are they using it? Why are they using it? These are all really, really, really important questions to ask. And the way that you can do this is through what's called evaluation. As I've got some quotes up on the screen around what it is, but In general, like according to Michael Quinn Patton, who is one of the leaders in the field of what's called utilization focused evaluation, evaluation is just a systematic collection of information about the activities, characteristics, and outcomes of programs, or I would say also just like things, strategies for use by people to reduce uncertainties, improve effectiveness, and make decisions. In general, evaluation just refers to the systematic process of ensuring that your work had the impact that it intended to have, looking for any unintended impacts, understanding why or why not your knowledge mobilization like worked as it did. It's kind of Mark Henry and Jones refer to as assisted sense making, which it helps you kind of understand where things are going well and where you might need to make some changes. There's no single way to do evaluation, and the evaluation that processes that you put in place very much depend on like the knowledge mobilization strategies that you are using. Conceptually, it's very similar to validity testing and statistics. When you're looking at validity, you're checking the degree to which a measure actually measures what it was supposed to measure. And when you're doing knowledge mobilization evaluation, you're checking the degree to which your efforts had the impact that you intended or any impact at all. As I mentioned, like you make an infographic, but to what end? Was it used? Who used it? How did they use it? Evaluation is vitally important, but it's unfortunately one of the first things to be forgotten. The reason that evaluation is so important, it tells you what to keep doing, what to stop doing, and where you had impact. This information is extremely helpful for writing reports and grants and like grant renewal for planning and very much moving this field forward. I will also say in like bigger grants right now, they're expecting that you will have indicators of knowledge mobilization outlined in your grant. Like you're saying you're going to do infographics. Okay, why? And how will you know if you're doing them? How will you know if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing? What are your progress indicators for knowledge mobilization? What I've got on the next slide is some sample like concept indicators around knowledge mobilization. I'm not going to go through them all, but they're here as resources for you for later on. And they come from Dr. Melanie Barwick's knowledge translation planning template. Dr. Barwick is like one of the gurus in this field of knowledge translation, has a wonderful planning template that's live linked through the slides here. But generally you can think of like reach indicators. So like how many infographics did you make? How many of people have been requesting it? You can do usefulness indicators, like how many people are actually using it. How many people find these materials useful? Use indicators, so how many people are actually taking your information, actually using them. There's partnership and collaboration indicators. So like how are you working with your partners to co-create materials? There are things, practice change indicators. So do people actually change their practice based off of these materials? Program or service indicators, policy indicators, and then generally lumped together in knowledge change indicators, attitude change indicators, and systems change indicators. And generally you would just look at the materials that you're doing, the impact that you thought you were trying to have, and then pick indicators to actually track those impacts. A bunch of evaluation resources on the next couple of slides. Again, I just have these in here to make sure that you have them. This is one of my favorite areas to talk about, and I think one of the most like critically important pieces right now. Happy to chat with any of you about it later on. I know that you're like, well, I'm not at Brock. You can still email me. I promise that I will talk. Before we go into our last like 5-minute group activity and a 5-minute debrief, I just want to give some final points. Use the term that you're most comfortable with. Always just think of your people. If you take one thing from this, it's just think of your knowledge users and like plan your knowledge mobilization around that. Engage with them as you like have a focus group, you're working with youth, get a bunch of youth together and talk with them about how they want to be mobilized with. Engage. This makes the process easier, more authentic, and it really makes it more fun. Lean into guidance from your audience. They are the contextual experts of their own experience. Remember that academic knowledge mobilization, it's still knowledge mobilization. Work to build your knowledge mobilization capacity with sessions like this. Remember, it takes a village, and always have fun. Like this is really the point where like all of you got into research because you thought what you were doing was important for the world, and it is. And knowledge mobilization is actually how you get it out there to have that impact. So lean into that fun piece. All right, so we're going to go back into our lovely groups right now. What you're going to be asked to do is that, which many of you already went ahead. So maybe we'll just do like a quick 5-minute group work to revisit your evaluation strategies, and then we'll come back, do a roundtable and any questions that you might have. Roundtable, room 1. Does someone want to talk about? I saw it like you were putting post-it notes up to the last second. So tell me just like one evaluation strategy that you thought of. Walk us through like quickly one thought.
We didn't have too much time to kind of discuss as a group, but I think one thing pretty common in our sticky note jumble there, is like verbal feedback or verbal conversation. So like chatting with our knowledge users to see if what the strategies we decided to use were helpful. And we really wanted to, like in our previous conversations, ensure that our strategies were streamlined with our users, and same with our evaluation strategies as well. So those are some of the things that we spoke about.
Awesome. And like, I would encourage all of you, when you think about that, think about ways that you can capture like in an accessible means. So like, you might not be able to have conversations with everyone, but like, could you put out surveys? Like if someone's coming to your website, could you auto populate that it pops up? You know, like you go to a like Canadian, like, oh, I'm speaking way too Canadian right now. A website, and then it pops up like, you want to give a feedback survey? And like, you're like, no. But like, you might do it when you're going to like a research-based what, like, just like, hey, give us some feedback. Or if you have like really, really, really awesome resources that you know people want to download, require them to give you their email before they download it. And then you have like suddenly like a knowledge base of people you could send, hey, I noticed you downloaded my concussion protocol. Tell me how you used it, right? Like you have that then. Or like do little surveys on your social media. So thoughts like that. Sorry, I get way too excited about evaluation, but I will contain myself. Room 2, anyone want to chat about some of the things you were thinking? Just one.
Sure. We went with the kind of numbers things, like number of participants at a community event, or the amount of women's sports teams in a year at a certain organization, or things like that.
Awesome. Yeah, numbers are great, right? It gives you that like baseline, like how many people actually tried to engage with this. Room 3.
We didn't decide who's going to talk, so I can just say it again. We went with like interviews and open-ended surveys and things of that nature to, I guess, look at acceptability and how supported the knowledge users felt. Awesome.
Yeah. And one note I should note in this, especially when working with Indigenous peoples, is to remember like around OCAP. So at least in this where it's the ownership, control, access, and possession, any work, even evaluation work, like if you're working with your Indigenous partners, please make sure that you're working collaboratively for evaluation, and that this is knowledge that they own. They are the knowledge holders of this, and working in partnership to like figure out what it means, so that information still always sits with them. Okay. Room 4. One thought.
I guess I can speak. One that we threw out there right before we closed was merchandising and ads. So depending on how you're mobilizing your knowledge, like if you do YouTube, or even if you're not for profit, but you have like mugs or stickers that you want to put on the car or something like that, the more that someone buys it or the more that someone's going to view it, we know that for ads, people are going to want to pay you to advertise. And then through merchandising and the costs, you know how much money or like how many people are actually looking. Because you should also be getting like the list of people you're sending it to. So yeah.
That's really creative. Awesome. I never thought about that. That's awesome. Okay. I'm gonna stop sharing for that. Thank you, everyone, for like working through that. It's now like quick. Any final questions? You're all getting the slides. My email is in the slides. I'm going to expand out a bunch of my pieces so you get more information than what I even talked about now. But I will put it out there. I know, like, as I mentioned, like you're not all at Brock, but we're all friends now. You can email me at any point if you have questions. If you're just like, hey, I'd love to have just like a chat to work through this, more than happy. Because I know not every institution has like a knowledge mobilization person. So questions or anything, or we'll wrap up a bit early as we promised. And I think, Kyle, you said you're going to stick around in case people want to chat or have any thoughts. So maybe I'll turn it over to you, Kyle, as well.
Yeah, we can just take a second now. Does anybody have any questions for Jayne or anything we want to bring up before we wrap up? I know there was a ton of great information and resources in there, so it's such an amazing pack of resources for everyone. So thank you so much, Jayne. We'll do the virtual applause here for you. This was an amazing session, and I'm really excited about it as a kickoff and a starting point to the other sessions as